Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Holy Happy Hour. I'm your host, Josh. And first of all, don't forget to like and subscribe. It's the YouTube way of spreading the name of Jesus around to other people. When you guys engage in the channel, it pushes it out to other people that may also want to watch and see what this is all about. So we're super excited for this series coming up. But to look back on some episodes that you guys may have missed, last week we had our other episode of Tell Me About a Terra come out, talking about New Year's resolutions. Really a lot about how we look at our future and what we're looking into for this 2025, but how we also need to stay in that sense of gratitude with being thankful for the time that God has given us. So it's a great episode. Check that out, as well as the interview I did with Sammy Jean, who is currently converting to the Catholic faith. She made one video on YouTube about it, and it blew up. And there have been tons of people talking to her about now the faith too, and it's super cool. God using her in a random video she made to reach a bunch of people. And so that's what this channel is also about, is just reaching people for Jesus. We know God can do stuff through this channel. So if you're watching this and you needed to hear something about anything we talk about in this channel, make sure you comment, email us, like, whatever, so we know, because we love to hear those stories about how God's working through this channel. So we are going to get into our 7-part series. If you guys don't know, we are going to be talking about the virtues and their the vices and their opposing virtues. And we may even dabble a little bit into their opposite extremes as well. But I thought no better to start than with one that maybe everyone kind of struggles with. I know it's one I struggle with, but I want to introduce our guest first, and then we'll get into that. So our guest today is the Vicar General from the Diocese of Tulsa, Father Kastl. How are you doing today?
I'm wonderful. Thank you, Josh, for having me on today.
Yeah, absolutely. I love having the priest on from the diocese. I mean, obviously, most of our viewers are from Tulsa, and so I know they'll be excited to have you on, especially for this first episode. But I do want to start with, because I had a question from a Protestant friend of ours that's in one of our Bible studies. He's like, "What is a vicar general?" And I was like, "Oh, you caught me off guard. I would not be able to give you a definition." And what I said was, it's kind of like Bishop Condola's right hand man. And I don't know if that's an okay definition, or maybe you could give us an actual, like, what a vicar general is and what you do.
Yeah, so it's a question I get asked all the time, because oftentimes, in the church world, the nomenclature that we use, the language that we use is not necessarily language that is used in everyday conversation. And so I think if you kind of look at the word vicar general, the word vicar kind of in the Catholic context, is one who represents somebody, and then the general piece obviously has more to do with the work. And so I represent the bishop, particularly in the kind of the governance of the temporal affairs of the diocese.
Okay.
If you look at canon law would say that the vicar general has all of the ordinary powers of the bishop, and except for the ability to make law. And so, I represent the bishop in a variety of ways, kind of at the chantry, kind of leading the team, and all of the directors. I work closely with our priests to make sure that they have what they need to be successful in their parishes. And I represent the bishop often out on boards and committees and in other ways out in the city and in the diocese. And so you also have heard it say like that the vicar general is the alter ego of the bishop. In other words, I can't do anything or move anything along that would not be within the mind of how Bishop Condola would want it done. So to your point, the best way to describe it, right-hand man, yes. From a corporate structure, COO, on the daily kind of the daily living of the diocese, just really helping him kind of manage all that makes up our 26,000 square mile diocese in eastern Oklahoma.
Yeah, nice. And it seems like something that's very needed, because I think when a lot of people think of the Diocese of Tulsa, you obviously think Holy Family and Christ the King, St. Mary's. You got I call them the Big Six: Anne's, Bernard's, Benedict's. But then you forget that the Diocese of Tulsa is huge. I mean, you got all the rural parishes as well, and you forget how far south it extends, and it extends all the way out to Stillwater. And is this the first time, though, that we've had like a full-time vicar general?
Yeah, so every diocese has a vicar general. We've always had a vicar general, but this is the first time in our history that we have someone in that role full time. And really, the main reason why this is happening kind of at this time in our history is that we are really working to implement a new strategic plan that Bishop rolled out, Jesus is Lord, and it has a heavy emphasis, really on the support of our priests, really looking at missionary discipleship, the lay apostolate, but also just really asking the question, how are we leveraging our resources, both human resources and financial resources, to support parishes, out in kind of out on the front line. How are we supporting our parishes to really be that hub where evangelization happens? And so that third priority really is about vicarious kind of regions within a region, making sure that they're getting the necessary support. And so I've stepped out of parish life for a period of time, really to help again move this plan forward and hopefully see the fruit, of the envisioning that Bishop has done for our future.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's much needed. And I'm super excited to see kind of how this like going full time, like how this role really helps the diocese be even more fruitful. It's been fun to be part of the Diocese of Tulsa. I know some people came back from Seek and they said, like, when people would ask where they're from, they say Tulsa. Like, oh man, I heard there's great things happening down there. And you see it now, like when you see well, I think Holy Family has like already like 50 something coming into the church. They just had almost 100 or so. I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but I know we have 15 coming into the church at the college campus, and there's Bible studies are going crazy. Focus missionaries are doing great work, and it's been awesome just to be a part of it and stuff. I've only been part of it for I think 5 years, coming up on 6 years now, and it's been fun to be a part of it. I always feel blessed to be a part of it.
Yeah, I would agree. And that I was at Seek this year, and that was mentioned often, and I think part of it has to do with, we have a bishop that is very down to earth, feet on the ground, kind of caring about what matters. Again, even the title of his strategic plan, Jesus is Lord. That's why the church exists, is to make Jesus known, right? And the fact that we have priests that actually like each other and care for each other, and there's not rivalry among the brotherhood, and we have, just a wonderful sense of engagement among the laity. And we've been blessed to work with Focus and Catholic Leadership Institute and Catholic Stewardship Consultants, just many partnerships that are really helping parishes and dioceses embrace vibrancy. And I think, again, to your point, you're seeing the fruit of that. Our Catholic charities, our Catholic health systems, our schools, all of these different entities play a part in making, again, the church alive here in Eastern Oklahoma. And so I agree, being a priest in the midst of it, I feel very blessed when I talk to others in different parts of the country that what is happening in Tulsa, is unique. We're small in number, but we're mighty in kind of how we show up in the work of evangelization.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm excited you mentioned Catholic Charities. I'm going to have Deacon Kevin Sartorius on for an episode later on to talk about Catholic Charities and all they're doing. I always knew about it, but I never knew the extent of it until I went out and met Deacon Victor, who then was like, "Have you done a tour?" I'm like, "No, I haven't." He's like, "Let's go," and we walked and did like this 30, maybe 40-minute tour, and I was just like blown away. I was like, "Okay, I knew about the market." I knew they did some like therapy stuff. It's like there's a dentist office here, and they're opening up the car shop, and they're doing it. And it was awesome to see like how extensive it is, how much they're doing for the not just the diocese, but just Tulsa in general, just the city. Super cool.
Absolutely.
Well, we're gonna jump into now the topic. So I had this topic, this series come to mind last year at Seek. Father Josh Johnson did an amazing talk, which I'll link in the description because it's so good. But he did a talk, and he did them briefly, and I thought it'd be cool to do 7 episodes, but of the 7 vices and I think he called it the 7 vices and their remedies, which was super cool. And then this past That Man Is You on this past semester, we also talked on the vices, and they took a single vice each episode, which was awesome. And so for the first week, I decided what better one to start with than pride. And I think pride is something that we can all struggle with in ways. So I thought maybe that would be a great place to start. And for pride, I don't know if maybe we should start. I always like to start and kind of lay the groundwork and define it. If there's kind of like a theological type definition of it, because I know pride can kind of have 2 meanings. Like there can be like a good meaning of it, like I don't know, or it can. I mean, I don't even know if it's a good meaning, but like it can seem good, but then there's obviously the vice part of it. But do you want to kind of like lay the groundwork for us and kind of like what is pride? Like how would you define it?
Yeah, so when you asked me to come on this show and kind of kick this off, and you told me we're starting with pride, I kind of wonder, if you're giving me a little signal there that I need to work on humility. But no, in all honesty, I think it's the perfect vice, or I would say deadly sin, for us to begin looking at as we move into the series, because pride really is it's the most insidious
Mm-hmm.
sin or affliction that we can have, because really at the heart of pride, it makes we place ourselves kind of at the center of the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
We place our own desires, our own thinking, our own interpretation of the world.
Mm-hmm.
We really do place that kind of at the center of the wheel, to the detriment, of, again, allowing God to work through us and properly order everything in our lives,
Mm-hmm.
and also to properly order how we are in right relationship with other people. And so pride is the great distorter, of our rightful place in the order of creation, and our rightful place in right relationship with God and with one another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was talking to my wife actually before this, and I was like, "This would be good to kind of get that definition and kind of lay the groundwork." And she's like, and ask too, because I think that so is pride considered the like root of all the devices? Is that
Yes,
a
pride
thing?
definitely, really is the root of every other sin,
Hmm.
and it really shows up. Again, it shows up in each of the other sins in a particular way. If I could just maybe just read
Yeah.
a little line out of this book. One of the books I oftentimes recommend to people who are working, kind of really trying to go deeper, kind of in the rooting out of vice and the increase of virtue, is a book
Hmm.
by Sister Margaret Mary Funk called Thoughts Matter.
Oh
Because when
yeah.
we start talking about sin, we have to recognize there's an anatomy to sin. There's a predictive arc, and how sins kind of take hold and manifest in our lives. And I think oftentimes why we don't get much traction kind of in the world of conversion is because we don't take time to look at how that sin is particularly manifesting in our lives. And then again, how we pray and our different kind of acts or spiritual works are not prescribed correctly against the anatomy
Hmm.
of the sin that we're facing. So it's a
Yeah.
great book, for those who are really wanting to go deeper.
Yeah.
But she has a great quote in here on pride, and she says, so
Hmm.
pride is the most deadly of all of the thoughts, because it tries to conquer the perfect. I think that's an
Hmm.
interesting kind of thing to chew on. So pride
Yeah.
is the deadly of all thoughts because it tries to conquer the perfect. Pride poisons all of my previous work regarding my thoughts, all my desires, all my passions. When I'm doing all the right things regarding food, sex, anger, things, dejection, and achadia, I begin to feel that I can accomplish everything on my own.
Mm.
With only a slight jump, I can then imagine that I am the engineer of my own destiny, and that I can determine the destiny of others too.
Mm.
So you really do kind
Yeah.
of see the insidious nature,
Yeah.
of this particular, sin in our lives. Like I said, I can use that image. It puts us at the center of the wheel,
Hmm.
and it gives us that false sense of belief,
Hmm.
that I can do anything I want, with my life.
Yeah.
But I also can do anything I want with the lives of other people, and how we begin
Yeah.
to use people or to use things as ends in themselves, versus
Hmm.
looking at the proper end that should be in mind as we engage with things, people in certain situations.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it's funny you mentioned the inviting you on because you may struggle with this. I thought about that of like, man, if I'm gonna pull the seven vices, like I'm gonna have to make sure that people know, like, I'm not inviting you on because you struggle with this. Because I was like, who do I ask to do lust? Like, everyone's gonna think that that person struggles. But with pride, is it something? So it's something I personally have struggled with for a while. And actually, I didn't start this podcast for months because I wanted to make sure I was in a spot of like being able to identify it. Like I was like, man, like this would be super cool. And if it blew up, and I could be like I could like do this full time, or I could be like I could do the podcast as Seek, and man, I have Matt Fradd on the show. And like all of a sudden, I was like thinking to myself, like all this like so I was thinking about me and where I could go, and not like I could use this to put God here, and like God could be here. I was putting myself there, but before I got to that point, I can't remember what it was, what the switch was. I think maybe it was just growing in my spiritual life. But how can someone that maybe doesn't know if they struggle with pride, and or their maybe friends are seeing that their friend struggles with pride, but they don't know how to like go about helping them identify that? Like, do you see that people that struggle with pride? that's the first step, is like, how do we get someone to like even identify that they struggle with this?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think the way in which we really come to understand whether we're struggling with pride, is in our spiritual lives, right? It's in our prayer life,
Hmm.
and so I think oftentimes where we are most convicted in the way in which pride has infiltrated, our lives, is when we allow the light of truth, the light of Christ, to shine kind of deep into our interior life, and
Hmm.
that oftentimes then brings to a higher level of consciousness within ourselves on why we are doing what we are doing. What is the motive
Hmm.
behind what we're doing?
Yeah.
Is the motive truly using, again, our God-given gifts and talents,
Hmm.
to, again, bring about the good of the other, to bring
Hmm.
about right worship to God?
Hmm.
Or if we kind of allow the light of truth to shine into our conscience as it relates to different things that we're discerning, or different activities that we're involved in, or why we're doing certain things, you know, oftentimes our own self-interests, or the level in which our own self-interests and our need to be seen, to be liked, to be appreciated, to be
Hmm.
exalted, begins to bubble up.
Yeah.
And so the challenging part of it is we can do great things, and we can
Hmm.
actually, be extraordinary leaders and be out in the front,
Hmm.
and be humble, because,
Yeah.
at the root of the work that we're doing is always a profound appreciation of why we are doing what we're doing, and how what we're
Hmm.
doing is actually serving the common good, and ultimately giving glory to God. When those
Yeah.
two things, I think, become devoid of our efforts,
Hmm.
we have to check ourselves, and
Yeah.
really say, am I doing this for my own good, for vainglory,
Hmm.
or am I doing this, really because I feel called and convicted to do
Hmm.
this, for the greater good of the community and for the glory of
Yeah.
God?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And that's very, very similar to what Father Elkin told me too, was when I was starting this podcast, and I was like, this is what I'm struggling with, those, this is how I just start to think. And he's like, yeah, you first thing is pray for it to fail, because if God doesn't want you to do it, like ask him to let it fail. And that way the views won't come, subscribers won't come. You'll kind of lose your passion for it if you're asking God to do that. But he said, but also, yeah, to continue to remind yourself that it's for the glory of God. So anytime someone's like, "Dude, I checked out that episode. You did awesome," and it's like, "Oh, praise God! Like praise God that like God was reaching you." And completely in prayer, I try to, before I start an episode, I try to pray that like God used me as an instrument, just to remind myself, to check myself, because I can still to this day fall into like looking at subscriber numbers, and like yeah, kind of puffing my chest because we just had a video blow up, and it's like, oh yeah, I need to back it up, and kind of re level myself out. But something you said too, that it has been tough for me over the last couple of years, was sometimes I can get myself in a good rhythm of being super humble, and not using the podcast as an example, but using like just being involved in my parish and super humble, like taking a back seat, being behind the scenes, and being okay like with work and doing like a big event. And it's like, this isn't for me. I'm not doing this to get glory for it, and it's awesome. But then yeah, you get this thing that like sometimes when you're in those states, I feel like when you aren't being recognized for some of the works you're doing, it's so easy for pride to come roaring back in for me sometimes, that there will be one day where you don't get recognized for something. It's like, hey, like this is awesome, it was for God, like I don't need to be recognized for it. Then the second time it's like, man, that kind of sucks I wasn't recognized for it, but it's okay, it's for God. And then the third time it's like, what in the heck, like why am I not being recognized for this? And is that just kind of us being human, and it's kind of natural to think that, but we still, I'm not saying it's okay, but natural to think that? Or I don't know if that all made sense. That was kind of a ramble.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, but I think
Yeah.
what you're saying kind of, speaks to the work of the spiritual life, right?
Yeah.
We every waking moment of the day, is a near occasion of virtue building, or it's a near
Hmm.
occasion of sin. So
Yeah.
a big part of, the spiritual tradition, is, guarding our hearts, and keeping vigil of our minds.
Hmm.
And so maybe on the days where you, as you just kind of explain that situation, where you were not letting yourself kind of escalate kind of in the need to be acknowledged and recognized,
Hmm.
your ability to keep vigil of your mind and keep
Hmm.
kind of yourself open and receptive to, again, gifts and talents from God, they're rightly ordered, and then you have a slip up,
Yeah.
and the ability to kind of really remain humble and focused on the why behind what you're doing,
Hmm.
slips, and you kind of start again going into the ditch,
Hmm.
of pride again, of needing to be seen, acknowledged, celebrated,
Yeah.
and so as is, with anything, in our spiritual lives, we're never done, right? The work of the spiritual
Yeah.
life is never
Mhm.
done. I think one of the fruits of, again, having a very strong and active interior life, a very active prayer life, and
Mhm.
having disciplined oneself, and being vigilant, with one's thoughts and where they allow their free falling mind to go, is that your recovery rate becomes quicker.
Mm.
When we live a life, kind of an unexamined life, we can
Mhm.
we can be literally driving the car in the ditch and think the ditch is the norm.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
can be living a life riddled in pride, and that's our norm, and we're blind to the fact that we're being prideful.
Mhm.
But once we have come to our senses and have, in many ways, like kind of renounced that way of
Mhm.
life and have allowed the light of truth that is Jesus to humbly shine, like into our actions and into our life. And the more than we keep vigil with that, the car may veer, our
Mm.
souls or our pursuit of virtue may veer to the right or into this, but we're able to get it back in the middle of the road quicker.
Mhm.
So to believe that we will ever perfectly arrive,
Mhm.
to being a humble person is pride.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. No, right.
the humble approach is to say, like, I know myself, I know the human
Mhm.
condition that's riddled with concupiscence,
Yeah.
um, and so I have to always keep vigil of my mind and to always be checking myself, and dashing anything that is not, of truth and of humility,
Mhm.
against the stone that is Jesus, and
Yeah.
get back in the middle of the road.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned the car because I was just picturing as you were saying all that stuff, the imagery that was coming to my head as you were explaining that was like when you're super prideful, it's just like you're in the car and you veer off the road and you're in the field, like whatever, off the highway, you've driven off into the field. But as you get to know it, you start to catch yourself. You're starting to veer off, and then I almost thought of like those bumps that you hit that make that loud grinding sound. Feel like it's almost like the like your prayer life. And it's like as you hit that, you start to learn like oh okay, like that can be your like you go to prayer when you're feeling that because that can get you like be your sign to kind of get back on, or maybe that's the part that you grow in that you hit that and you're like, oh, I'm starting to be prideful, and then you're veering back, it's getting back in your prayer life. Because I know that was for me the only thing that I could do is get into prayer time, and if I could sit there for do a holy hour or something and just kind of really reflect on it, I tried to take that frustration to God, and I tend to sometimes I won't say I'm definitely perfect with this, but that's what I tried to do is tend to take it there into prayer and it just express my frustration there because half the time I would leave feeling a lot better, like a lot like more comforted and stuff. Now, when it comes to this kind of things, this is something that I've been doing, and I don't know if this would be considered enabling or if this is a good thing to do. But I thought to myself, like, if this is something I struggle with, I'm sure other people do too. And so what I try to do is actively look for people in my life that are doing something. Think of like a Branson Trader, for example, like focused missionaries, always serving others, and I always want to make sure that I tell him, not like every week or anything, but like every now and then I want to make sure, hey, just so you know, like we appreciate everything you guys do for us, and I want to acknowledge him and make sure he's knows like that we appreciate him because I know that that's what I would want someone to do for me, and I don't know if that would be like if someone was to do that to me, and I know I'm not doing it so that someone will do it to me, but if someone was to do that to me, I don't know if that would enable me to then be like, oh, and I start puffing my chest again, and I start being prideful. Does that sound like something that would? I guess you would need to know the other person.
Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing kind of in your statement, I think there's two things. I think the one way is like, how do we combat pride,
Mm-hmm.
in our lives, and then, again, always checking the motives behind why we're doing what we're doing to combat
Yeah.
pride. Because again, when we offer a charitable action towards another people, again,
Mm-hmm.
you open up the near occasion of sin, to be appreciated for appreciating somebody else, right?
Yeah.
And so going back to that vigil of the mind of the motivation and the why behind what we're doing. But if you going back into again this book by Sister Meg Funk, and she's going back into the early tradition, one of the things they would say is the greatest way to combat pride, is manual labor, or physical activity, or acts of service, where you are physically again having to exert energy, in your body towards the good or the well-being of somebody else. And so I think whether that is, again, an act of charity of simply offering words of appreciation, you're having, again, to humble yourself, to celebrate the accomplishments and the good of another person as a pure act, which, again, gets yourself out of the way, but I would say, again, pride manifests itself also, right, as the receiver of other people's appreciation. That if we deny a person to offer us proper praise or appreciation for something that we have done for them, again, out of the theological virtue of charity, right? Through a charitable act, through something that we have done good, we glorify God by that, right? And then we also manifest the love of God through our actions, through the act of charity. So doing good towards others is a virtue. Yeah. And so people oftentimes will have a desire or a need to say thank you for experiencing the theological virtue of charity through you towards them. But if we begin regulating and saying, no, don't say that, or I can't receive that, or brushing it off and not receiving it, that's pride. Because people have a need to show appreciation towards those who have done good to them. We should have the humility to properly place that offer of gratitude that's been given to us versus rejecting it. Because again, it goes back to us being at the center of the wheel and regulating. We are regulating what comes in and comes out of ourselves versus freely receiving our gifts and acting and freely receiving, again, what comes back to us by no merits of our own.
Yeah. Man, it's so interesting. Yeah, pride, that makes sense. That I'm glad we started with this one then, because that, it just seems like I could see exactly how this would come up, like pride would come up in all the episodes, because it could lead to lust, or could lead to other it could just lead to a bunch of them. And now if someone was, so say like me 3 years ago, and I'm just like, I'm struggling with this, this is hard. So when we're trying to look at the remedies, obviously the humility being the opposing virtue, where should someone start? Obviously prayer life, but where would you recommend someone start if like someone's listening to this and is like, man, they are talking about me. Episode is for me.
Yeah. Before we go there, can I just make one more distinction that I don't think we talk about this enough? That I think in the vice of pride, or I would even say in the affliction of pride, in the tradition of the church, we talk about carnal pride and we also talk about spiritual pride. So there's kind of two distinctions, right, that are made. And I say most people are probably dealing with the carnal pride because they've not advanced enough in the spiritual life to actually get to a place where, again, spiritual pride is starting to show up. And so if you were to look in the scriptures, into like Mark chapter 10, verses 17 and following, the story of the rich man, he comes up to Jesus and ultimately asks him, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus said to him, why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone. The commandments. He goes through all the commandments. At the end of that, the rich young man ultimately says, I'm living all those things so perfectly, right? And so Jesus then tells him, you lack one thing. Go sell what you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in the heaven. At this saying, his countenance fell, and he went away sorrowful, for he had many possessions, right? And so, again, this idea of possessions owning him, right? And so I would say you would see both spiritual and carnal pride active in this guy. Like, I'm living all of those commandments, right? Like I am doing all of these things, right?
Yeah.
And then you also see the attachment to the physical world, that these things are ends in themselves versus means to an end, a life of detachment. And so in the rich man, you see both spiritual pride and you also see carnal pride happening within him. But I
Hmm.
think most of us, again, deal with carnal pride, like how we use food, how we use sex, how we use things.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
use those for pleasure, for ends in themselves. They're tools to make me happy, and I
Hmm.
use them not again as they're properly meant to be, food to nourish my body versus
Hmm.
I'm gonna eat all the food I want because I'm just I have a sweet tooth and I'm gonna eat 10 pieces of cake.
Yeah.
Sex, pornography is a great example. I use
Hmm.
sex in a disordered way. That's pride. I'm at the center of the wheel, choosing how to use my sexuality or the sexuality of others. And
Yeah.
then things like the rich young man, right?
Hmm.
I want to possess and hold on to these things because they are connected to my identity as a
Hmm.
person. These things actually own me versus me stewarding them. So I
Yeah.
think in that passage of Mark 10, 17 and following is a worthy passage for all of us to reflect upon when we're
Yeah.
considering spiritual pride and carnal pride.
Hmm.
And really, again, are we living the commandments like as the pathway to true interior freedom? Or are we living the commandments and appearing to be very pious, but we're
Hmm.
filled with plunder on the inside, right?
Yeah.
Or we have all these things and we say we share, but do we really share proportionally with what we have?
Yeah.
Or am I hoarding and possessing? So that's
Yeah.
really where pride shows up, I think, both in the spiritual life as well as in the temporal kind of order
Yeah.
of our lives as well.
Yeah. So you're saying so we would need so most of us are going to need to overcome the carnal pride. So getting over the physical, like I said, food, pornography, that. And but once you've made it past that hurdle, that's when the spiritual pride would be the next kind of hurdle to get over.
Yeah, because I think one of the dangers in the spiritual life is that as we truly are progressing in a life of virtue,
Hmm.
um, what is the great lie of the devil, right? If you eat
Hmm.
this apple, you will see as God sees, right?
Hmm.
It puts kind of this back on kind of this disordered quest to see as God sees, like to
Yeah.
be God, kind of on this side of heaven.
Yeah.
We are called to become like God, but not to be God.
Yeah.
And so as we progress and grow in deeper intimacy with the Lord, we do have to, again, guard our hearts and our minds to not allow the infiltration, of the thoughts of the evil one to begin kind of luring us to think, what, like, look at
Hmm.
me,
Yeah.
look how far I've come. And then to begin to believe the lie that I am where I am, kind of in my progression in the spiritual life,
Hmm.
because of my own doing, my
Hmm.
own hard work.
Yeah.
No, I mean, yes, we cooperate,
Hmm.
but it is God acting upon us and us responding versus us acting upon God. And
Yeah.
I think that's where spiritual pride really begins. I begin to control or try to manipulate the relationship
Hmm.
um, with God in my spiritual life.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, that takes it a lot deeper than I haven't gotten past the first step yet. But yeah, that's awesome to hear. That also puts one of my favorite quotes from Saint Philip Neri, who's the patron saint of this podcast. Which it kind of takes it to a deeper level. He says, "Give me 10 detached men and watch us change the world." And I've always loved that, and I've always just thought to myself, just from worldly things, but being able to just like completely just be detached and just your mind and eyes on God. I think it was a couple days ago for me on the 33-day Eucharistic consecration book that we just got out at Christ the King, of them talking about that, just being completely detached from the world and always having our eyes on God. And in this specific thing, it was talking about FOMO. Like a lot of people get that fear of missing out, and this being like the joy of missing out, just being we're pilgrims and we're on our way to God. But there's gonna be a lot of distractions that are gonna want us to uh, be comforted in this life, to settle down and make this home. But we should be kind of living a life of discomfort, and we should be moving forward and knowing that like my stuff, if it like the house burned down today, like I shouldn't be so. I mean, you can be distraught. I guess that's a bad example. But if your car got scratched or something, it shouldn't just be the end of the world, and it shouldn't just enrage you. But being just detached from things and understanding that they're just objects, and keep your eyes focused on the right thing. A lot of what you just went over is kind of a deeper, going even deeper than from the stuff that I've been kind of seeing in my readings and stuff. So it's really cool.
Well,
So
and I think this
yeah.
is part of the reason why I think we see people coming to confession, and
Hmm.
they confess again food, sex things. They confess the base
Hmm.
conditions, the carnal afflictions and the attachments of this
Hmm.
life. And I'm always amazed, when someone comes in, 3 days later, 5 days later, 10 days
Hmm.
later, and they more or less confess the same list, and they do it
Yeah.
again, and they do it again.
Hmm.
And I oftentimes will ask the question, like, what is your spiritual plan? What
Yeah.
what are you doing intentionally to move yourself towards chastity, towards
Hmm.
temperance, towards
Yeah.
moderation, towards humility? And oftentimes there's not an answer. And I
Hmm.
oftentimes think that there's not an answer because they honestly don't know.
Yeah.
Because we've not always done a good job, I think, in the life of the church
Hmm.
to look at the practices, that we need to be doing in order to move ourselves from vice to virtue. And
Hmm.
and again, going back to this book I'm referring to today, one of
Yeah.
the things that Sister talks about, and this was a huge part of the early tradition, is renunciations. Like I have
Hmm.
to, before God, like in my prayer, in my interior life, I have to renounce my former way of life. Like I have
Hmm.
to, in my mind's eye, and when I close my eyes and think kind of my life as a movie reel in front of me, like looking at, in this instance, like where does pride show up? How does pride
Hmm.
show up again in my use of things or my use of
Hmm.
people,
Yeah.
in my career? And I have to come to a deep kind of interior kind of sense of compunction and
Hmm.
sorrow that it's disordered.
Yeah.
And as I sit in prayer with that and recognize it is disordered, I have to renounce it. I have to, like, in the
Hmm.
name of Jesus, like I renounce this false self.
Hmm.
I renounce this manifestation of pride and attachment in my life.
Hmm.
And not only to renounce it, but now that I have a higher level of consciousness that this is disordered in my life,
Hmm.
going back to prayer, like I have to again bring that
Yeah.
before the Lord in a very deep and intimate way, in that space of meditation and contemplation,
Hmm.
and to kind of begin to envision what a future free of that attachment or that vice looks like,
Hmm.
and then begin to pray for the particular graces necessary to, again, in this case, like begin to acquire the necessary graces to live a humble life in the face
Hmm.
of, again, where pride has riddled me.
Yeah.
um, and it's unbelievable work. And to your point, you said earlier, it is very uncomfortable. There's sacrifice that's involved. There's
Hmm.
self denial that's involved.
Hmm.
You know, but that's when we say do your spiritual work. That's what we're talking about. We're not just
Yeah.
saying go to confession to the car wash and then go right back to your former way of life.
Yeah.
Like as I'm aware that I have disorder in my life, like I really have to bring that before the Lord in a very particular way,
Hmm.
renounce it, reclaim again my identity as a son or as a daughter, and then again have a spiritual plan to climb out of the ditch that I have
Yeah.
gotten myself in through, again, living an unexamined life, and a life that, again, has been me at the center of the wheel.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that reminds me of that meme that the people are trying to save that lamb that's like stuck in that little crevice, and they finally get it out, and it runs and it jumps like twice, and then just goes right back into the crevice. You're just like, you
Yeah.
take a different path, like don't like go that way. So
But
so
I
would you?
think, but
Yeah,
at the heart of the moral life, right?
hmm,
Is to not live in the extremes. We
yeah,
can live
hmm,
in the extreme of sin, but we also can live in the extreme of self denial and
yeah,
mortification.
yeah,
But we know the media via the middle way,
hmm,
is the way of the moral life in the Catholic tradition. And as I say that, it's not about like, that a little bit of vice and a little bit of mortification mixed
hmm,
together as a middle way. No, what I'm saying is
hmm,
when you live a life that's been enlightened by faith, when
hmm,
you live a life that's deeply entrenched in a life of prayer, when you live a life that's very open and receptive to the gift and the power of the Holy Spirit,
hmm,
shining again into our consciences,
yeah,
we're able to again use things according to their purpose,
yeah,
according to their end. We're able to steward the gifts that we have been given towards the greater good. And
hmm,
we have to again be highly conscious, highly aware, highly alert, and intentional to use the greatest gift that we've been given, which is our free will and
yeah,
our ability to choose and to act. Um,
hmm,
uh, but it's easier, as I always say, it's always easier to cling to the side of the swimming pools than to
Yeah.
tread water in the middle.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of work to tread water in the middle. And what
Yeah.
we're talking about today of moving away from vice to virtue, it's creating that spiritual fitness to tread water in the middle,
Yeah.
and to really be hyper vigilant about what we're about.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that was probably the thing I struggled with the most. Was I was kind of like that person where they say when you're driving on ice and you start to slide, the last thing you want to do is like rip the wheel one way or the other. And that's what I felt like my life was like. I would like get hit a little skid or something, and I would just rip the wheel to the left, and I would go straight into pride, like become really, really prideful because everything was going so well, and I'm the best, and I'm so good at this. I'm going to be awesome. Or it would do the opposite, and it'd be like, okay, well, if no one's gonna recognize me, like whatever, like I must suck, and I just like, and I kind of get into the self-loathing side, like the opposing extreme. So for 2025, and I've encouraged people, I've done some posts and a video on this channel of like I've encouraged them not necessarily to do as much like resolutions, but to do like to choose a word. And I love that, choose a word. I even like to put like a saint quote with it, but my word is mild, and I'm trying to be slower to react and slower to just uh, respond to situations anyway. Take things to prayer. I love when I ask Father Porter something. It's like, let me pray about that. I love that response. I'm like, man, I wish that was my first thought. So I'm trying to slow down and make that my first thought. That way, I don't rip the wheel to the left or the right, and I don't just the car's not just going all over the place. But I can be more mild. So my word, I don't know if that word ever came out, but the word mild for me for this year is to try to slow down, to stay in that middle. And then I loved your analogy too. Yeah, build that spiritual fitness that allows me to kind of sit there in the middle of the water to tread water there. Because yeah, that's been a struggle of mine. Is just going left and right, and and it's exhausting too. It's exhausting to feel that way. Then especially when you get to that self-loathing side, and then you really kind of feel confused. Of like I don't even know what I'm struggling with at this point. Like if I'm struggling with pride or I'm struggling with self-loathing, and I know it's all kind of within the same kind of. But yeah, all
Yeah.
right. Well, so what would be your recommendations? Kind of we've kind of talked about the prayer life and stuff. We kind of talked about things that we can do individually. Would another recommendation you would you say for this to be to walk with somebody to go with? I feel like when it comes to these like seven deadly sins, the seven vices, that walking with someone would be something that would just be almost like a must. Like you should do this. I have that community.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we could just kind of maybe look at the word humility for a minute, I think
Yeah, yeah.
the word humility, which is the opposing, virtue for the vice of pride.
Mm-hmm.
We all know that it comes from the root word of dirt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Humility comes from the root word of dirt, and it's not surprising that the virtue, which we would say again is the charioteer of all virtues. So just as pride is kind of is the center of the wheel for all of the vices, we would say humility is the center of the wheel for all of the virtues.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we look at again, the root word of humility is dirt, and we go back to in the book of Genesis, is
Mm-hmm.
from the earth, right? That
Mm-hmm.
human beings were fashioned,
Yeah.
and it is back into the dirt that we're going to go when this life, as we know it, passes away, and our souls go on to be with God in heaven forever.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and how often in the scriptures, right? When there's the call for great conversion, that people put themselves into the dirt and they cover
Mm-hmm.
their heads, with ashes and wear sackcloth.
Yeah.
How interesting it is that when we open the season of Lent, right, we have
Mm-hmm.
ashes or dirt ground into our mortal flesh,
Mm-hmm.
and we're reminded that you are dust, and to dust you shall return.
Yeah.
And so even just to pray, with the word humility, and to pray
Mm-hmm.
kind of with these images of dirt and ashes and death and decay,
Mm-hmm.
and to recognize that it's kind of even like in that space of death and decay that new life comes out from this substance, right?
Mm-hmm.
When things pass away, something new is nourished, and something new can bud forth. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think even praying kind of with the concept and the imagery, of the virtue of humility, is helpful to combat pride, because, as we come to an awareness of where pride is manifesting itself,
Mm-hmm.
again, we can then use that imagery in our spiritual life of again putting it in the dirt, of burying it,
Mm-hmm.
of letting it die, letting it decay, for the
Yeah.
purpose that something good, can come from it. And I think one of the things that we have to be careful of in the spiritual life, again, is the extreme of humility.
Yeah.
That all we do is this work of self abasement, of I am nothing, I am little, I am worthless, I am small. We kind of live
Yeah.
again in the ditch on the left,
Yeah.
of a misappropriation of what humility should be looking like in our life.
Yeah.
Because true humility, right, allows the light of truth to actually shine into our broken and disordered passions, desires, and our conscience, so
Yeah.
that way we can see ourselves as God sees us, which we know in the story of creation, He created us as good. We are good.
Yeah.
And He equips each of us with certain gifts, talents, and abilities that He wants us to see as good, and that He wants us to steward them. And so when we truly are living humble lives, again, what that looks like is, again, we are open and receptive to allowing God to show us who we really are, and how He desires us to use and to steward the life that we have been given in a way, again, that that doesn't just, again, use, but multiplies the gifts that He has given us. And in that work, again, to honoring, to give glory to the Creator.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the great things you mentioned, having someone walk with you. I would encourage you, go ask your wife, Josh, like, honey, like where am I prideful? Be careful in asking that question to somebody, because
Yeah.
are you ready to hear the answer?
Yeah.
But people who are closest to us become the best mirrors, right? To mirror back to us where there is still work to be done, particularly as it relates to pride.
Yeah.
And then the question is, are you able to receive that in a spirit of humility, and to be curious about that, and then begin to do the spiritual work, taking it to the dirt, like, taking it to the mat with the Lord, and wrestling with it, and being willing, to do some self-mortification and self-denial, to do penance, to fast, for the purpose of the conversion of how pride is manifesting itself very particularly in your life, which may look differently than my life and somebody else's life.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm getting a lot better at it. And my wife, on one hand, was working on being more gentle when she would say stuff, and I was working on like being able to actually receive it. Because she would in beginning parts of our marriage would tell me like, hey, this is like, you're being really kind of prideful here, and would explain it. And I was not able to receive it. It was just, she was being very blunt and very just truthful. And I personally was just like, I can't accept, like, why would you tell me this? Like, why, or whatever. But remembering that when it's someone like your wife, we're always, after we kind of get our little tips, we always remind each other, like, we're on the same team. Like we're working together. This is like Kobe telling Shaq, "Hey, when you roll, like, be looking for the ball because I'm gonna throw it to you." It's like we're on the same team, even though it may seem like we're getting in a little tiff. Like, all I'm trying to do is get you to heaven. All I'm trying to do is help you become more virtuous so you can get to heaven. Because I would say I was not able to receive that at first. That was definitely part of that whole growing experience over these last couple of years.
Yeah. I want to share one more interesting thing that Sister brings up from St. John Cassian. She says, Cassian admonishes that striving for perfection through our own efforts, but leaving God out, is the sin of blasphemy. This is serious for one who has renounced one's former way of life, and then renounced even his or her thoughts, and maybe even thoughts of God. Then to renounce God is a major setback in the spiritual journey. This sin leads to temptations, especially against chastity. Cassian goes on to note that one of the first disciplines to break down chastity: I see no reason to restrain my sexual desires if there's no one except myself to whom I am accountable. So again, when we go at this alone, striving for human perfection, again, going back to the rich young man, I lived all of the commandments, right? But I can do it without God. It puts us in even a more dangerous situation. And what they're saying is here, oftentimes, the whiplash of this experience, again, is going back into the carnal expression of pride, of the disordered use of our human sexuality. And so again, we ask our spouses, we ask our friends, where's their way? How do I need to improve? You get the information, you create your spiritual plan. The first place we go is to our knees, right?
Yeah.
Not to white knuckling it towards perfection,
Yeah.
but rather truly again recognizing that there's a connection between effort and grace. That we have to always draw our strength for conversion from God, kind of in a spirit of humility, while we then again apply our effort towards kind of behavior modification and change in what's
Yeah.
coming out
Yeah.
in our actions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so yeah, those people that aren't married and you're younger, you just not haven't found that person yet. I know for me, I've got two great people. I mentioned both of them already. My wife and then Branson, who's focused missionary, but really just he's my best friend. We're both in this the same parish and where we're walking together, and it's been amazing to have because I feel like as a man, you need you and your wife definitely. That's always the first go to. You guys are working together, but you also should have that other man that you're walking with. We have a small group discipleship that we're all walking together and continuously growing. And that's a group that I would also feel comfortable saying like, hey guys, what do you see in me? Like, where can I improve? I would feel comfortable asking those two guys that, and so that they could let me know. And I know I could take it better than if I was just to hear it from some stranger or something. But yeah, I had something else came to mind when you had brought that up, but I just spaced on it. But yeah. Anyway, um, any other last advice for anyone before we kind of wrap up on
Yeah,
Prime?
I think um, I think it's Augustine. The unexamined life is not worth living,
Mm-hmm.
and I just would encourage people, especially as they go into the season of Lent this year,
Mm-hmm.
to be very intentional in their
Yeah.
prayer life, to examine their conscience. And you
Yeah.
know, God has given us, this beautiful gift of a mind,
Mm-hmm.
and our minds store, so much, and so to go before the Lord in prayer and just close our eyes and just to kind of allow the day to kind of roll back over our consciousness as a movie reel would run, and to really again to see the areas in where we have beautifully responded, to God's
Mm-hmm.
will, and where we have cooperated with the graces it has given us, in a rightly ordered way, and to give
Yeah.
thanks, but also to again to sharpen the eye of our mind, to be able to
Mm-hmm.
see areas where we have fallen short, particularly again as it relates to pride.
Yeah.
And as we're aware of that, to then, as I said before, to renounce it, to really, in the name
Mm-hmm.
of Jesus, use the power of the most holy name of Jesus to renounce things that are disordered in our lives,
Mm-hmm.
and to then pray with fervor for the renewal of grace to come and backfill that space
Mm-hmm.
that has been, again, riddled by sin.
Yeah.
And then just, again, to be committed every single day to do this
Yeah.
work, and to be committed to every single day just to have the desire to guard your heart and to guard your mind, and to be curious about the anatomy of the sins of our lives, because they're very predictable. And when we start, again, applying the salve that is Jesus, in the
Mm-hmm.
very onset of how those sins begin to manifest themselves, that's where we really start seeing conversion,
Yeah.
and we start living into the freedom that God has desired, that God desires for us.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it kind of came to me as you were saying that. What I was thinking is that when I kind of got into that and I really started praying about it more and asking for more and really working on it daily, I started noticing in mass that it's like I know we knew we say this all the time, and I've recited it so many times, but it was sticking out to me so much more. And it was like when you're doing Lexio and that word or that phrase just pops out off the page, and you're like, whoa, like that's sticking out to me. But is that Lord, I'm not worried that you should enter under my roof, but only say the word, my soul should be healed. And I just all of a sudden that was just popping out to me. And it was just even to this day, just such a great reminder of like the humility of like, I'm not worthy, but all you have to do is speak this and my soul can be healed. And that like, I take that to everything that I do. Like I am not worthy to have a Catholic podcast, God, but if it is your will, like I know that this could be fruitful for your kingdom. And I try to stick with that. And so every single mass, every time we say it, so I always tell people that's like my favorite thing we say during the entire mass. Just love that part.
Yeah,
So
that's great.
yeah. Well, awesome. Well, Father, thanks for kicking it off. We're super excited for the rest of this series. We're going to definitely keep in mind this episode because this will be the root for the rest of them that we're going to go into. you guys join us next week. Don't forget to hit subscribe and the alert bell so you guys are alerted when the next one comes out, because it'll come out every Thursday. And this will kind of lead up to Lent and kind of go through Lent, because it is kind of a long series. But next week we have Tara Lauderdale, and we're going to be talking on sloth. And she's already texted me. She's super excited. And you guys obviously know that she has her episodes on this channel. But you guys, thank you for tuning in. We hope that this was fruitful for you as well. Continue to support the channel. And if you guys want to be a part of our Catholic community, online community we're creating, don't forget you guys can sign up to be a monthly supporter as well. You guys get a custom rosary. You guys get a Holy Happy Hour shirt, all sorts of great merchandise, but even more so you get part of this great community that we can continue to walk with each other as well. So you guys have a great rest of your week. And Father, have a great week. We'll probably see you soon. And God bless everybody.
Thank you, Josh.